Welcome to the Salty Swede Presents, friends. Today I'm going to show you some basics to working with epoxy resin. Videos make it look easy, but it's not. Resin is basically a science experiment where you think you know how it's going to turn out, but often ends up with something different and likely worse than your original plan. I'm no expert. I've only been working with resin for a few months, but I've already learned a lot, much of it the hard way, and I want to share it with you. I'm a longtime crafter using many mediums over the years, but I'd always been intimidated by resin. When I was remodeling my kitchen several years ago, I thought I'd try doing an epoxy resin countertop. Luckily, I did a test on a smaller scale and realized that resin is way harder than I thought and scrapped the idea entirely. But recently, after doing dot painting for a few years and learning how to work with liquids, I decided I might want to think about resin again. I've also been doing my own gel nails for a decade or so and have a decent understanding of how moving liquids with different tools and in different ways gives different results. And I knew that it would take a lot of practice to get it right, just like any other technique. So I hope you learn a few things, most importantly, to be patient with yourself. There are many different types of epoxy resin out there and an unbelievable number of brands. That makes it really hard to know what to buy and how much you should spend. My first project was going to be to coat a stone I had dot painted to see if I liked it. After some research, I decided I'd need a coating resin and bought a small 16-ounce kit on Amazon for 15 bucks. It came with some measuring cups and stir sticks, so it seemed like a sound investment regardless of the outcome. I chose a stone I wasn't in love with just in case I hated how it turned out, and I did. But then I kind of went down a resin rabbit hole. I discovered all of the challenges that came with resin, and there are a lot, but I was also kind of fascinated. My resin said it's suitable for coating or casting, so I decided to make some coasters to see how I liked it. I wanted to do geode coasters, which look amazing and easy in videos, but they aren't. Things rarely turned out how I wanted them to, and I made a lot of ugly coasters, but after a while I got better, and so will you. Tip number 1, start small. Work in the 30 to 100 milliliter range. This includes coasters and small vessel molds. You could buy a set of round coaster molds and a 16-ounce resin kit on Amazon for about 25 bucks and make a few coasters to see if you like working with it. We'll start with one today. Tip number 2, working with large amounts of resin can cause flash cures, so working with small amounts to start will help you learn the easy way. But using too little resin can cause problems too. Resin has to get hot to engage the chemical reaction between the two parts. And if you're working in a cold space or with very small amounts, it may not generate enough heat to cure, which will leave you with an uncured project and a big mess. And not all resins are good for all purposes. I had bought a kit that was for coating and casting, but after trying a second brand, I realized that many of them say they're for coating and casting, but that may not be true. There's another video on my channel where I talk about a few different brands and how they worked for me. Resin sticks to most anything, but not everything. And you've got to know how to make the resin cohesive with whatever you're going to put into or on it. This is, after all, a science experiment. I'm going to stick with what I know so far, and that's 2-part epoxy resin. Within that family of resins, there are different types. Deep pour, if you want to pour more than 1/4 of an inch, and casting resin, which is for smaller, shallow projects like coasters. Coating resins are a different consistency and are designed to form a very thin layer, whereas a casting resin may cause fisheye while it cures if it's too thin. This is where some research is needed to know your resin and what you want it to do. For our coaster tutorial, I'll be using Let's Resin epoxy resin. This is the brand I've used most so far, and it does small castings and coatings with pretty good results. I'm still trying out brands to see what makes them different, but Let's Resin makes a lot of products besides resin, and the ones I've tried work well and are reasonably priced. I contacted them with a problem with my bubble remover, and they sent me a new one. It was a really good customer service experience, so I'm even more impressed. If you've had a resin kit sitting in your basement for 5 years and it's started to turn yellow, don't expect great results. Most resins should be used within a year. There are a lot of resin rules, and you'll hear people tell you that it's okay to use some types of resin for a project, but until you try it, you just don't know. So use that crappy old kit and see what happens. Your first project isn't going to be great anyway. Plan for mistakes and know that it's all part of the process. We're also going to be using glitter. Any glitter will do. Whatever you have around the house is fine. You'll need to cover your work surface because here's objection number 1, and it's a big one. Resin is really messy, like really super duper messy. I use a silicone mat for my desk, but you can put down whatever plastic sheeting or newspaper you have. Which leads me to objection number 2, waste. Gloves and cups and sticks and paper towels and all the things I've ruined by getting resin on them, they all go in the trash. If you get resin on something you didn't mean to, it's unlikely to come off. So if you want to commemorate your wedding by casting flowers from a bouquet, don't make that your first project. In fact, that should be done very carefully and after lots of research into how you should do it. Yes, there are reusable things, but not everything can be reused, and that sucks. Throughout the tutorial, I'll show you some tips and tricks to reuse things. Objection number 3 are safety concerns. Most resins are advertised as non-toxic or low VOCs, but there's a lot of information out there that over time these chemicals can be dangerous, so look into that for yourself to decide if this is the right hobby for you. Resin won't cure in the cold, so working in your garage or other outdoor area may not work in your climate. An ideal working temperature is 78 degrees Fahrenheit, not your typical living room. It should also be ventilated. Objection number 4 is having an appropriate workspace. Your work surface, as well as your parking place, or where you place your object to cure, must be completely level or your resin will not be. You can buy leveling tables on Amazon, and I used one while I was working on a card table, but mine isn't perfect. Sometimes the bubble says it's level when it's not. Later I switched to a desk and made sure it was level, and I haven't had a problem since. Which leads me to tip number 3, don't buy stuff you think you might need. You could easily watch a few tutorials and think that you need to buy heat mats and degassing machines and air purifiers, but you don't need any of that to get started. In fact, you may never need it, so don't buy things that you aren't intending to use as soon as you get them. You'll find plenty of stuff around the house that you can use, like toothpicks and popsicle sticks and glitter and mica powder. This is where craft hoarders will be thankful they saved all that stuff. Tip number 4, use your community's Buy Nothing Facebook page to see if anyone has resin stuff they bought but never used. Facebook Marketplace is a close second. There's bound to be someone near you with a bunch of crap they need to unload. Take advantage of it. Which leads me to tip number 5. Use resin as part of another hobby. If you're a woodworker, you could use resin to do all sorts of cool stuff. But I'd still suggest practicing with it for a while before you use resin on something that's really important to you. I use my Cricut to make these cool ornaments. There are plenty of uses for resin as part of your crafting. Back to the tutorial and our first question. How much resin do I need? And that leads me to tip number 6. Have a plan and write it out. You need to know what you want to make, how much resin you'll need, how much additive to use, and how much time you have to work with it. Let's Resin has a working time of 40 minutes according to the manufacturer, but for our coaster today, we'll be pouring into our mold right away, so I'm not concerned with work time. I know that my coaster mold holds 60 milliliters when it's completely full. Tip number 6, I found that out by putting the mold on the lid of my top-load washing machine, filling a mixing cup with water to 100 milliliters, and then pouring it into my mold until it's full. Then I deduct the amount left in the cup from 100, and that's the total volume of my mold. I like to write that on the back of the mold so when I need it next, I don't have to measure again. When I pick up the mold, the water will just run onto the lid of the washer, and I can dump it aside when I open it. But make sure your mold is completely dry before you use it. Water and resin do not mix. For this coaster, I don't need to completely fill the mold. If it doesn't turn out how I hoped, I'll have saved myself a little resin for next time. So 50 milliliters should be plenty. And even though I'm in the US, I like to use milliliters because when you're working with small amounts, you have more measurements to choose from. There's a huge difference between 1 and 2 ounces, and there are 30 milliliters in an ounce. Tip number 7, use your home assistant to set timers. Resin is time sensitive and needs to be mixed properly. By setting a timer, you'll be able to concentrate on doing it right and not how soon you can stop. I've got gloves on, and that's not just because resin is messy. It's very easy to develop an allergy to it when it comes in contact with your skin. The best way to avoid developing an allergy is to never allow it to touch your skin, but that's basically impossible because resin gets on everything. Once you put gloves on, assume you have resin on your hands and avoid touching anything you don't mean to. I can't believe the amount of resin I've had to cut out of my hair in just a few months. Sometimes it was because I was leaning over my resin, but mostly it's because I scratched my head or moved my hair with what I thought was a clean gloved hand. Until you learn to control the resin really well, It's going to be messy, so wear sleeves that you don't mind ruining and tie back your hair. Once you get resin on something, it's very unlikely to come off. Washing resin from your hands is impossible, so wear the gloves and use baby wipes to clean up your skin. If you spill resin, the best way to clean it up is to leave it to cure overnight and hope you can pull it off whatever it's stuck to. The more you wipe it, the bigger mess you make. By letting it cure, you can just peel the resin off. Once I accidentally used 2 parts of A and no B with my mix for a set of coasters and didn't realize it until I went to demold the next day. It had obviously not cured at all, and I was stuck with coaster molds full of goo. At that point, it made more sense to throw the molds away than try to clean them up. It wouldn't have been worth the effort or the bigger mess I would have made. Theoretically, I could have cleaned them up, but I wasn't willing to find out how much that was going to suck, so I just bought new molds. And you don't really need to clean your molds after you remove cured resin from them. But if there's residue or dust in your mold, you can use clear packing tape to clean it up. Eventually, your molds may wear out after many uses, but they can also develop a haze and scratches on them, which will leave a scratch in your finished project. Remember, resin gets hot when it cures, so over time that wears out the silicone. If the inside of your mold isn't shiny, then the bottom of your coaster won't be either. If your mold is bent from shipping or being in the bottom of your craft room closet for 5 years, you're probably not going to have the best results, but you can try. That's what resin is all about, trial and error, making the environment as perfect as possible to get that chemical reaction to happen the way you want it to. The first thing we need to get right is the ratio. Most tabletop casting and coating resins are 1-to-1 ratio by volume, meaning I need to use 25 milliliters of part A and 25 milliliters of part B for my coaster, but refer to your resin kit's instructions to know for sure. It seems like it would be easier to use a scale and measure by weight, but that won't work if your ratio is by volume, because one of them may weigh more than the other. It might work, but I wouldn't count on it. With resin, it seems like there are a lot of things that might work, and sometimes do work, but if you'd rather just do it right the first time, follow the instructions. So I'm using a graduated mixing cup. There will probably be one in your kit, and I'm going to measure out my 2 parts in this cup. I've heard it's best to measure them separately and then pour into 1 cup to stir, but that's just more of a mess and a waste of resin because it's now coating 3 cups. When you're working with a small amount of resin, that's a lot of waste, so just mix it in 1 cup. Use a popsicle stick to stir, and do this very intentionally. Set your home assistant for 5 minutes. Yes, I'm serious. Could you get away with 4 or maybe even 3 minutes when you're mixing such a small amount? Maybe. But is it worth messing up your project? No. Just let Alexa tell you when your time is up. In the video, you can see that I've got quite a bit more resin than I need, but I'm going to pour a couple of things for another project with this batch. I'm using a clear plastic cup so you can see what's happening. The 2 liquids are thick and different viscosities, and if they're cold, they're even thicker and harder to combine. Every brand has its own formula, so expect a different viscosity from each and adjust your process accordingly. Warming your resin before stirring can help it mix together more easily, but this isn't always necessary and can cause a flash cure if it gets too hot. For your first project, I would try it at room temperature and see what happens. If you have problems, try warming it for the second try. As I begin mixing, you can see that it becomes cloudy and ribbons run through it as you try to combine the 2 parts. By combining these 2 parts, I'm going to turn the liquids into a new chemical that will eventually be solid and, hopefully, cool and useful. But I need to be thorough. I'm running my stick around the walls of the cup, scraping the bottom of it, and making sure I catch the right angle where they meet. I'm stirring gently, not whipping it around like egg whites. Stirring it faster won't make it combine faster, it'll just make more bubbles. Scrape the sides and bottom several times over your 5 minutes, and stirring in the same direction can help prevent bubbles. But bubbles are a part of life when you're working with resin. We aren't going to worry about them too much today. Glitter causes a lot of bubbles, and we're not going to be able to get rid of all of them, so don't sweat it. Using a silicone cup is great for resin because you can just wait for the resin in the cup to cure and then pull it out. But silicone does cause more friction while you're stirring and generally gives you more bubbles, but try both if you have them. Tip number 8, hold your resin in your hand to help it warm up. Your resin needs to get to a very high temperature to harden, so if you're starting with cold resin, it may not get there. Just holding it in your hand can help raise the temperature. But you can put the bottles in a water bath to warm them, but be careful of this because if the water is too hot, it could cause a flash cure after you start stirring. Tip number 9, I store my resin in the basement, but I refill these dollar store condiment bottles from my gallons and keep them on my desk. These in particular are nice because they have measurements on the side and the plastic is really thin, so if I hold these in my hands for a few minutes before I start mixing, I can start the warming process early. They also make pouring much tidier with fewer messes. Tip number 10, whenever possible, let your resin mistakes cure before trying to clean them up. If I drip on my silicone mat, it would be much easier to clean up the next day by just pulling off a little blob of resin that's cured. But if I try to clean it up with a paper towel while it's uncured, it will always leave residue, always. And that's even harder to clean up. But if I drip in my workspace, I'm just going to keep putting my arm in it or something worse. So I just wipe it up as best as I can. A baby wipe works pretty well. Silicone mats get gross eventually, and you can replace them when it bothers you, but you'll never get them perfectly clean again, no matter what you do. Packing tape, baby wipes, alcohol, even after doing all that and then washing them with soap and water, you still won't get them perfectly clean, so don't risk your drain by trying to make them pretty again. It's a losing battle. Once you've finished your 5-minute stir, we're ready for our next step. Your resin may feel warm in your cup, and that's good. We need it to get hot. If you're working with a larger amount, maybe over 150 milliliters or so, depending on the brand, or if you warmed your resin too much, you should be cautious of a flash cure, but if it's just warm in your hand, it's okay. The two chemicals are now one chemical, and they're going to start doing weird stuff over the next several hours. Our goal is to do stuff to this soon to be solid in a way that doesn't affect the curing process. This is a good time to move your resin into a separate cup if you're using more than one additive. For our coaster, we're only using one additive, so I just need 1 cup of 50 mils from my larger batch. By separating a large amount of resin into smaller cups, I'm keeping it from getting too hot and causing a flash cure, which means some parts of the resin cure very fast because it got dangerously hot. Every brand is different, so experiment with what you have to find that sweet spot. I like to use these 3 and 5 ounce paper cups that I buy at the grocery store. They're disposable, which is perfect for glitter because it's so messy. Now I'm going to add my glitter to the resin. As I do this, you can see that the resin gets thicker. It's also creating a lot of bubbles. There's no way to avoid this, and I could try to let the bubbles escape somehow, but I'll never get all of them, so don't drive yourself crazy. We'll deal with them later. Now there's only so much of anything I can add to resin before the resin is going to protest, usually in the form of not curing properly. So although I'd love to use more glitter than resin, that doesn't work. The resin just won't cure. I've read that you should add no more than 10% additive to the total amount of resin, but I can say I've successfully used a lot more glitter than that in a coaster, so see what your resin will tolerate. For our coaster, I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons of chunky glitter to 50 mils of resin. Additives should always be added after A and B have been combined thoroughly and not before. We don't want to interfere with the chemical reaction between them. Glitter is problematic for other reasons besides bubbles. It either sinks or floats in the resin, which means we're going from something very faceted to becoming flat on either the top or bottom of the resin. To keep it suspended in the resin, we need to create a suspension using another chemical, clear Elmer's glue. When I add 2 drops to my resin, it becomes a big, bubbly, lumpy pile of snot, and that's exactly what I want. By adding the glue, it's suspending the glitter in the resin, so it doesn't float to the top or bottom. If you don't have any glue, try it without and see what happens. Now I'm ready to pour, and I'll only use about half my resin at first. I've got a heat gun, and I hit it with that to see if I can get some of the bubbles to pop. This is the best environment for the bubbles to escape, when they're in a thin layer. By adding heat, I'm helping them along, and also getting the resin hotter so it can cure. A lot of people use a kitchen torch for this, but it's easy to burn your mold, and I find them inconvenient. I've had this heat gun for about 20 years, so it's nice to find a use for it. If you don't have either, don't worry about it. I'm also pushing the resin into the side of the mold to create a pathway for it to flow where I want it. I use my stir stick to get the resin into the right angle, where the floor and sides of the mold meet. Bubbles tend to get trapped there, but I can help them move to the surface with my stick. But don't use anything sharp. It can leave a mark on your mold. You can see the resin is a gloppy mess, and that's okay. This is a very simple mold to fill. But if I was using something more complicated, I might have trouble getting all this goo into the nooks and crannies, so keep that in mind for future project ideas. Tip number 11, once I've poured the resin into my paper cup, I can set the plastic mixing cup aside. Later, I'm going to leave a stir stick in the cup with the leftover resin, and after it cures, I can pull it out and reuse the cup. Do your best to keep your work area clean, but know that resin is hard to control, and every time you stop and start, it will drip on something, so plan accordingly. You'll get better at pouring and, more importantly, stopping. As I finish up my pour, I've got plenty of room left in my mold. Resist the urge to overfill. It's very easy to spill, and if you need to move your mold to a parking spot, you're going to have a real mess on your hands. My parking spot is on the kitchen counter a few feet away from my desk. That way I don't have to move my projects too far, but they're out of my way while it cures. Tip number 12, use a pancake turner to move your coaster molds to their parking spot. Tip number 13, use a mesh food cover to keep dust and debris out of your curing resin. They collapse like an umbrella when you're not using them. I've got plenty of working time left on my resin, but I don't need it. I'm going to park it overnight and let it work. Over the next several hours, it will go from liquid to gel and hopefully a solid. We may be able to hurry this along using a heat mat, but you don't need one. Just leave it be. Hopefully any bubbles will continue to rise to the surface and pop. At certain points, you can add things to your project like dried flowers or add a second coat of resin, but it takes some practice to know exactly when and how to do that, so save it for another day. And at some point, you'll be able to demold your resin, but each manufacturer is different, so check your instructions. If you wait 24 hours, you should be safe, unless you're using a deep pour resin, which can take several days to cure. Here we are the next day, ready to demold. The glitter looks great. It's very sparkly and not floating flat on the top, but it doesn't have a nice glassy finish like you would expect. There are also a lot of imperfections from bubbles that have popped, which leave tiny holes in the surface. This is to be expected. Glitter will always stick up from the surface of the resin, and you'll always have bubbles. I'll show you how to address that. Let's look at the back of the coaster. It looks fantastic. The glitter is suspended nicely in the resin, so all those facets are catching the light, and it's shiny, just like the inside of our mold. I like using a chunky glitter for this because it has multiple sized flakes and shapes that sparkle beautifully in resin. But if you have a fine glitter you want to try, that will be just fine. The back of this coaster looks pretty awesome. There are some holes from bubbles right where they usually end up, but the glitter hides a multitude of sins, so I'm happy with it. Let's look closely from the side. The sides are nice and shiny, just like the back. But now that it's out of the mold, I can see that there's a lip around the top edge. This happens because resin shrinks as it cures. It's totally normal, and you can sometimes avoid it, but that takes some practice. For now, we'll deal with the lip in another way. In fact, I'm going to use it to my advantage when I pour a top coat on this thing later. This edge is kind of sharp, and it'll take a bit of extra resin to fill that up to the brim, so I'll show you how you can fix that. I'm going to use a deburring tool to trim this lip to get it looking smooth. I'd never used one before, and when I got it, I thought it was broken, but it's not. It spins around in the handle intentionally, and I can use it to take off the tiniest amount of that lip at a time. You can see on the tool that it has a little curl of resin coming off as I went around the edge. If I hit a bubble hole, my tool gets hung up a bit, so I've got to be careful. I don't want to take off too much resin at a time, or I could end up with divots. This takes skill and practice, so go slow. From the side, you can see that the lip is a little smaller. I removed the sharp edge, but didn't dig too far into my coaster. I'm going to dome this one, which will be a bit more advanced, so I'll set it aside for now and show you an easier way to finish it. I made this purple coaster and I haven't domed it yet, so what I'm going to do is use my deburring tool to get the sharp edge off. Then I'll lay some 220 grit sandpaper face up and sand the edge of the coaster until it's flat. This makes a big dusty mess that you'll have to clean up, because dust is the enemy of resin. I'll continue to sand this down until the lip is completely gone, and if I want to, I can sand right into the glitter, which may change the color. After sanding for what seems like forever, I'll be ready to clean the dust and move on to the finishing touch. I've dusted off my coaster and used a little rubbing alcohol to really clean it up. My last step is to take one of these cork circles I got on Amazon and stick it on the back. I had to settle for circles that were just slightly smaller than my coaster, which is better than the first time where I bought some that were too big and had to trim them all down. Just make sure you measure before you order. If you're up for a challenge, you can top coat your coaster. You can do this with resin tape by creating a dam around the edge, but I'm going to use the lip on my coaster to do that instead. This is slow and time-consuming work, so take your time and be patient. You'll need to learn how to control the flow of your resin, which takes practice and skill. I'm going to mix up some resin. I know from experience that my coasters take about 12 mils to top coat, but that's a really small amount of resin to mix up. If you're mixing less than an ounce of resin, it may not get hot enough to cure. I usually wait until I've got a few things to top coat and then do them at once. But don't mix up too much because this process will take a long time and your resin will start to get thick and difficult to work with if you're top coating a lot of pieces at once. Maybe try making a couple of coasters and top coating them together. Once I'm done stirring my resin, I'm going to settle in and pack my patience. I'll pour a small amount of resin in the middle of my coaster, and then I'm going to hit it with my heat gun to pop some bubbles. Make sure you don't pour too much resin at first, and you'll see why in a second. I'm going to pick up my coaster, and I'm going to use my stick to spread the resin like I'm spreading butter on toast. I need to push that resin right up to the lip of my coaster, but not go over the side. For some sciencey reason, if I keep it on the horizontal surface, but not allow it on the vertical surface, the resin will stick together and not run down the side. All that is well and good until I spill over the side because I'm not paying attention. So I'm going to stop and clean up a bit because I've spilled it right in my work area, and if I don't clean it up, I'll be sticking my elbow in it until it cures. I also need to get the resin off the side of the coaster, or I'm going to give it a path to follow that I don't want. By removing that path, I hope to keep the top coat where it belongs, on the top of the coaster. I've sped up the video, but know that this technique is very time consuming, so take the time you need to be successful. I'm going to continue around the coaster, getting the resin on every surface of the top. You'll see that the resin is shrinking away in some areas. That's called fisheye. This can happen for many reasons. Sometimes it's due to temperature, sometimes there's something on the surface of your resin like dust or moisture that keeps it from sticking. It can also be the type of resin you're using. Not all resins are suitable for top coating and doming. You just need to try it to find out if your resin will do what you want it to. In our case, the fisheye is caused by not enough resin. It's taking the path of least resistance, and if I keep adding more, the fisheyes will disappear, hopefully. By smearing the resin right up to the edge, I'm giving it a path to cover what I want. The lip is keeping it from getting too far, but you've got to keep adding very slowly so you don't overflow. Now I've moved it to my parking spot, and I'm going to sit down and look at it from the same level, so I can see exactly how much I'm adding and where I need more. I can see some edges still have the lip sticking out from the resin, and I need to form a dome in order to get these to disappear. This is very slow work and gets easier with practice, so try it on your ugliest coasters first to see what happens. Once I've completely coated the top of the coaster in resin, I'll monitor for about a half an hour. The resin is leveling, and if I go back after 10 minutes, I'll see where I might need a little bit more. Try to be patient. Start a timer or go change the laundry. Just give it a little time. When I've finally finished, and hopefully not flooded it over the sides, I'll use my food cover and leave it to cure overnight. And the next day it looks great. The surface is smooth and shiny and the glitter looks beautiful. I hope your coaster turns out the way you wanted, but if it doesn't, try again. Resin is a great tool to have in your craft repertoire, but it does take some practice to get used to. By tackling a couple of small projects first, you can decide if you want to keep going or if a glitter coaster is as far as you're willing to go. Either way, I hope you give it a try. Good luck!